It was the kind of small town where time seemed to move a little slower. The sound of birds in the morning and the quiet hum of the wind through the tall trees made the place feel peaceful. A narrow road led to a small cluster of homes, each one sitting far enough apart that you could live your whole life there and still feel like you had your own private world. That's exactly what the woman wanted when she came to town. A quiet, simple place to spend her next chapter. Her name was Martha Reynolds, and she had spent most of her life teaching children how to read and write in a nearby city. After retiring and losing her husband, she found herself living in a house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. The rooms that once held laughter and conversation now echoed with emptiness. She wanted something smaller, something easier to take care of, somewhere she could start fresh. One morning, while browsing online listings, she saw an advertisement that immediately caught her attention. It showed a tiny home built on a small plot of land at the edge of a forest. The ad described it as cozy, affordable, and perfect for a peaceful lifestyle. The pictures showed a neat little house with a white porch, a small garden space, and a wooden deck that looked out over a patch of trees. It looked modest but charming, exactly what she was looking for. When Martha called the seller, the man on the phone was polite but brief. He told her the house was built only a few years ago, that it had everything she needed: running water, electricity, and a working fireplace. But whenever she asked about the property itself, who had owned it before or what the land was used for, his answers became short and vague. "Oh, just standard property," he said. "Nothing unusual about it." At first, she didn't think much of it. She assumed he just didn't know the details. After all, she'd seen plenty of sellers who were more focused on closing a deal than talking about history. A week later, she drove out to see the place in person. The drive took her along winding roads through fields of grass and patches of pine forest. As she approached the property, the landscape opened up. The little house stood alone, its tin roof glinting under the sun. From the outside, it looked like a picture from a home magazine, small, tidy, and inviting. When she stepped out of her car, the smell of pine and fresh soil filled the air. A cool breeze brushed against her face. She could hear the faint sound of a creek somewhere nearby. The moment she saw the porch, she felt a strange sense of calm, like the place was quietly welcoming her. The man selling the house was waiting near the gate. He was in his late 40s, tall, wearing work boots and a faded jacket. He introduced himself only as Mr. Bennett. His handshake was firm, his smile polite but distant. "Everything's as advertised," he said, unlocking the door and stepping aside. "It's small but sturdy, built to last." Inside, the home was even cozier than the photos had shown. There was a small living area with a couch and a wood stove, a kitchenette with a simple counter and 2 stools, and a single bedroom with a big window that looked out toward the trees. The wooden walls smelled faintly of cedar. Everything was clean and neat, like it had just been built. Martha ran her hand along the countertop. "It's lovely," she said softly. "Just what I've been looking for." Mr. Bennett nodded, though he seemed eager to move things along. "If you're serious about it, we can start the paperwork this week. I've had a few people ask about it already." She laughed lightly. "I won't take long to decide." But as she looked around, she noticed something peculiar. The back section of the floor, near a small pantry, seemed slightly raised and almost unnoticeable, but just enough for her to wonder. She pressed her foot on it. It made a faint hollow sound. "Is there a crawl space under there?" she asked. Bennett's smile didn't change, but there was the briefest flicker in his eyes. "Just a bit of storage," he said quickly. "Nothing special. The builder added some reinforcement down there." That answer didn't quite fit, but she didn't push. After all, it was an old habit of hers. Teachers noticed details that others missed. Still, the house felt right, and after sleeping on it for a night, she called him the next morning to say she'd buy it. Within a few weeks, she moved in. It felt good to start fresh. The quietness of the forest, the gentle rhythm of rain on the roof, and the smell of the fireplace reminded her that peace didn't have to mean loneliness. She planted flowers in the front yard, hung curtains in the kitchen, and filled the bookshelves with her favorite novels. For the first time in years, she felt content. But there was something about the house she couldn't quite put her finger on. Sometimes, late at night, she would hear a faint hum coming from somewhere below her feet. Soft, almost like a vibration. It would come and go at random, never long enough for her to track it down. Other times her dog Buddy would stop suddenly in the hallway and stare at the pantry wall, tail stiff, ears alert. He'd stay like that for a full minute before walking away as if nothing had happened. At first, she laughed it off. Old houses make sounds, she told herself. But this wasn't an old house. It was barely a few years old. One evening, while sorting through a box of her old books, she found the folder that contained all her property documents. She had been too busy settling in to really study them. Sitting at her small kitchen table, she began reading through the papers again. Most of it was standard: contracts, receipts, inspection forms. But tucked near the back of the folder was a folded piece of paper she didn't remember seeing before. It was yellowed around the edges, as if it had been there for years. When she unfolded it, she realized it was a blueprint. It showed the layout of her house: the living area, bedroom, kitchen, and the little porch. But there was something extra drawn beneath the main floor: a shaded rectangle marked with faint lines and notes. It looked like another room buried below the house. Her heart gave a small jump. That couldn't be right. Her house didn't have a basement. She stood up and went to the pantry, the same spot where she had heard the hollow sound weeks before. She tapped the floor with her knuckles, hollow again. She moved her foot across the wood. Same sound. She smiled a little, half nervous, half excited. Maybe it really was just storage space. But the way the blueprint marked it, so carefully, so deliberate, made it seem like more than that. The next morning, she asked her neighbor Tom about it. Tom lived about a mile down the road, an older man with a kind face and a habit of bringing over fresh vegetables from his garden. "Did you ever hear anything about this land?" she asked, showing him the blueprint. "Before my house was built." He squinted at the paper. "Not much," he said. "This area's been empty for decades. Used to be part of a larger property. Some kind of government site, I think. They cleared most of it out in the 60s. Nothing ever came of it," Martha frowned. "A government site?" "That's what my father used to say. There were a few storage buildings back here, maybe some testing equipment. They tore it all down before I was born." That made her think. Why would a simple lot like this have a hidden section drawn on its plans? And why had the seller brushed off her questions so quickly? Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She tried to distract herself with chores, with gardening, even by visiting the local market. But her thoughts kept returning to that blueprint. Every night before going to bed, she'd glance toward the pantry and feel that quiet tug of curiosity. Then something happened that made her curiosity even stronger. One night, during a heavy rainstorm, the power flickered for a moment. When the lights came back on, she noticed a faint glow, a thin line of light outlining a section of the pantry wall. It was subtle, almost invisible before, but in that brief flash, she saw it clearly. She walked closer. The glow was gone, but she could see what she hadn't noticed before: a tiny gap between the boards running vertically from floor to ceiling, almost like a door frame. Her heart began to beat faster. She pressed her hand against the wood. It felt solid, but there was a slight draft coming from behind it. For a few minutes, she just stood there, unsure what to do. Then she took a deep breath and stepped back. "It's probably just bad construction," she said aloud, though even she didn't believe her own words. Buddy barked once, his tail wagging nervously. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the image in her head: that glowing outline, the hollow sound, the blueprint showing an extra room. Everything pointed to something being there, something hidden just beneath her feet. When morning came, she made herself a cup of tea and sat on the porch, watching the fog lift from the trees. She thought about her life, about how she'd spent years teaching others to ask questions, to stay curious, to never ignore what didn't make sense. Maybe this was her turn to follow her own advice. The tiny home had seemed like such a simple, peaceful escape when she bought it, but now she could feel that it was hiding a story, one that was quietly waiting to be discovered. As she sat there with her tea, she smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "All right then, let's find out what you're hiding." What she didn't know was that this little house, which looked so plain and ordinary from the outside, held something beneath it that would soon change everything she thought she knew about her quiet life, and about the land it stood on. Martha's mind raced with questions. For days, she found it hard to focus on anything else. Every time she walked past the pantry, she felt like the walls were closing in around her. That faint glow, the hidden outline, It was as if the house itself was daring her to uncover what it had been keeping secret. After the rainstorm, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the small, quiet life she had hoped to live here wasn't going to be as simple as she had imagined. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the strange things that seemed to be hidden just beneath the surface. The next morning, she took her dog Buddy for a walk down the path that led to the small creek she had seen when she first arrived. The sound of the water rushing over rocks always calmed her. She hoped a walk in the fresh air would clear her mind. But as they walked, her thoughts kept circling back to the house. The blueprint she had found, the strange humming noise, and the way the floorboards had sounded hollow in that one spot. All of it felt like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. She had grown up in a family that always taught her to ask questions. Her father had been a mechanic, always taking things apart to see how they worked. When she was younger, she had spent hours watching him, learning how to fix broken things, how to solve problems. Her parents always said, "You don't be afraid of what you don't understand." And now, as she stood by the creek with Buddy pulling at his leash, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right in her new home. By the time they returned, the sun had started to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. The house looked the same as always, calm and quiet, but to Martha it seemed different now. She wasn't just living in a house anymore, she was living in a mystery. That evening after dinner, she couldn't sit still. Her curiosity had become a kind of restlessness that wouldn't let her relax. She made up her mind. It was time to investigate. She couldn't keep ignoring the strange feeling in her gut. First, she grabbed a flashlight and made her way to the pantry. The small room was dimly lit, and everything seemed normal at first glance. The shelves were lined with jars of jam, bags of flour, and cans of beans. But the walls seemed to hum ever so slightly, almost as though something was vibrating beneath them. She knelt down, using her flashlight to examine the area around the pantry's back wall. Her heart beat faster as she traced the outline where the strange glowing line had appeared the night of the storm. She pressed her ear against the wall. The hum was there again, soft, almost imperceptible, but definitely present. She felt a shiver run down her spine. The wall didn't feel like it should be vibrating. This wasn't a normal house sound. This was something else, something she couldn't explain. As she stood up, Buddy began to bark, his tail wagging furiously. He was standing at the edge of the pantry, staring at the wall with wide eyes. Martha knelt down to calm him, but her mind was already racing. There was definitely something behind this wall. She could feel it in her bones. The next morning, she went back to town to get some tools. She didn't know exactly what she was hoping to find, but she knew she needed to check. She felt the need to uncover the truth, no matter how strange or unexpected it might be. She walked into the local hardware store, hoping to find something that could help. The store was quiet, with only a few people milling about. The owner, an older man with gray hair and glasses, greeted her as she walked in. "Morning, Martha. What brings you in today?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "I need a crowbar," she said, her voice sounding more certain than she felt. "And maybe a hammer." He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask further questions. "Looking to do some work on the house?" he asked. She hesitated, unsure how to explain her sudden urge to tear apart a perfectly good pantry wall. "Just some repairs," she said. "Nothing major." He nodded, still eyeing her carefully, and led her over to the tool aisle. Martha picked out a crowbar and a hammer, and when she returned to the counter to pay, he seemed to notice something in her eyes. That same spark of determination that her father used to get when he was about to start a big project. He didn't ask any more questions, but he gave her a curious glance before she left. Back home, she set the tools on the kitchen table. The sun was already beginning to set, casting a warm glow through the windows. She had to be careful. She didn't want to damage anything, but at the same time her curiosity was pushing her forward. After a quick dinner, Martha took a deep breath and grabbed the crowbar. She went back to the pantry, her hands a little shaky. Buddy was beside her, sniffing the floor, as though he too knew something wasn't right. Martha pressed the crowbar against the edge of the pantry wall and gently applied pressure. At first, nothing happened. The wood was firm, sturdy as she'd expected, but when she pulled the crowbar out slightly and tried again, a small section of the wall shifted. There was a tiny gap, just enough for her to fit her fingers inside. With a sharp tug, the piece of wood came loose, and for a moment, she just stared at the hole she'd created. Behind it, there was only darkness. She took a deep breath and slipped her flashlight through the opening. What she saw next made her pulse race. There was a narrow gap behind the wall, barely wide enough for a person to slip through. The space stretched downward, disappearing into shadow. The faint hum she had heard earlier seemed louder now. It was coming from down there, from wherever the gap led. Martha felt a mix of fear and excitement. Her heart pounded in her chest as she crouched down to get a better look. She could barely make out the outline of a narrow staircase, old, weathered, and hidden in the dark. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to leave it alone, to not go any further. But her curiosity was stronger. She had to know. She had to see where the stairs led. She grabbed a flashlight, checked the batteries to make sure it was working properly, and then squeezed through the opening. Buddy followed closely behind her, his paws clicking softly on the wood as they both descended into the narrow space. The steps creaked under her weight, but they held firm as she slowly made her way down. At the bottom, she found herself in a low-ceilinged room that smelled of dust and old wood. Her flashlight swept across the area, revealing what looked like an abandoned storage space. Boxes were scattered on the floor, some broken open, others still sealed shut. Metal crates sat against the walls, most of them covered in layers of dust. The room was a mess, but it was clear that it hadn't been touched in years. But then, as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw something even more unsettling. There were papers, lots of them, scattered across the floor, and among the piles Martha could just make out what looked like blueprints. She picked one up and unfolded it, the paper crinkling in her hands. The first thing she noticed was that it wasn't a blueprint for the tiny house. It was for something bigger, more complex. It looked like some kind of underground facility, a lab or testing area. There were rooms labeled with strange symbols and sections marked as secure and experimental. Her heart skipped a beat. What had this place been used for? Why had it been hidden so well beneath her house? She flipped through the papers quickly, trying to make sense of them. But before she could look further, a faint noise interrupted her. A sound, soft, mechanical, almost like a hum. It was coming from the far side of the room. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned toward the noise. What was it? What had been hidden here for all these years? The noise startled Martha. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. A soft mechanical hum, almost like the sound of an engine running in the distance. For a moment she stood frozen in the dim underground room, flashlight trembling in her hand. Buddy, her dog, whimpered softly beside her, his ears twitching as though he too could hear the sound coming from deeper within the darkness. Martha swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure what she expected, but this wasn't it. She had assumed that whatever was hidden in this forgotten space beneath her house was just a relic of some old government project or abandoned experiment. But this felt like something more, and something still alive, still moving even after all these years. Slowly, she took a step forward, her footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. The flashlight beam bounced off the walls, illuminating the piles of old crates and broken equipment scattered around the room. The hum seemed to grow louder as she moved deeper into the space, and with every step the air felt thicker, almost charged. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath. She reached the far wall where the sound seemed to be coming from. There, hidden behind a stack of dusty crates, was a small metal door. It was rusted and old, but it had a thick lock securing it. A lock that looked far too sturdy for something that had been left untouched for decades. Her hand hesitated over the lock, fingers brushing against the cold metal. She had no idea what she was about to uncover. What was behind that door? What could still be running, humming after so many years? Her mind raced, filled with questions, but there was no turning back now. She had already come this far. Martha took a deep breath and pulled out the crowbar she had brought with her. It was an odd feeling, using a tool to break open something that had been hidden for so long. She hesitated for just a moment, wondering if she was doing the right thing, but the curiosity burning inside her pushed her forward. With a sharp tug, the crowbar pried the metal door open. It didn't make a loud sound, but the resistance it gave as she pulled it open sent a shiver down her spine. Behind the door was a small room, smaller than she had expected, but far more organized than the chaos around her. There were wires running along the walls, some of them connected to strange equipment, old machines with dials and buttons that hadn't been touched in years. A faint blinking light on one of the machines seemed to be the source of the hum. Martha stepped inside, carefully navigating the clutter. She knelt down to get a closer look at the equipment, brushing away layers of dust from a nearby console. Her flashlight illuminated the faded labels on the machinery, but nothing made sense. The labels were all in code or a language she didn't recognize. Some of the machines were labeled Test Area, Energy Flow, and Phase 3. She reached out and lightly touched one of the buttons on the console, just out of curiosity. Immediately, a low beep echoed through the room. The humming noise grew louder, and Martha felt the air around her seem to shift, as though something in the room had just been awakened. She quickly stepped back, heart pounding. What had she done? Was she activating something she shouldn't? But the noise didn't stop. It continued, a steady hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air. For a moment, she just stood there frozen, trying to make sense of it all. She looked at Buddy, who had backed away from the machines, his ears flattened in nervousness. He wasn't the only one feeling uneasy. Martha's mind was racing, trying to put everything together. This wasn't just some old abandoned lab. It felt like something more. This room, this underground space, had a purpose. But what was it? A flicker of movement caught her eye, and she quickly turned toward the far corner of the room. There in the shadows was a large metal box. The humming noise seemed to be coming from inside it. It was old and worn, but still intact. She had seen something like it before. A storage container of some kind. But why would it be down here, hidden away from everything else? Martha approached the box cautiously, her flashlight shining across its surface. There were no labels or markings on it, just a smooth metallic exterior. But as her hand hovered over it, she felt the distinct sensation of warmth coming from inside. She couldn't resist. Without thinking, she ran her fingers over the edges of the box, searching for a latch or a way to open it. The surface was cool to the touch, but there was an almost imperceptible vibration that made her hesitate. Was it still running? Was it something dangerous? Then, as her fingers brushed the edge of the box, she felt a faint click. The lid of the box slowly opened and Martha took a sharp breath, her heart in her throat. Inside there was a small cylindrical object, sleek and metallic, unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was covered in wires and small lights, and it hummed quietly as if alive. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it was important. She carefully lifted it out of the box, the weight of it surprisingly light in her hands. The humming grew louder, the lights on the object flickering in time with the noise. Her mind raced, trying to understand what she was holding. It felt like a piece of a much larger puzzle, something that could explain everything she had found so far. The hidden lab, the strange equipment, the hum that seemed to come from nowhere. Martha set the object down on the ground and looked around the room once more. Her heart was still pounding, her head spinning with all the new information. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. She couldn't keep running from whatever this place was. She glanced at the papers she had found earlier. The blueprint of the underground lab. There had to be more here. She couldn't leave without uncovering everything. Whatever had been hidden in this space was bigger than just a few old experiments. It was something far more complex, and she was determined to find out what. As she stood there, trying to make sense of the overwhelming silence that had settled over the room, a faint noise interrupted her thoughts. A soft click. The sound of something turning on. Martha turned around quickly, eyes wide, her breath catching in her throat. The machines around her were beginning to hum more loudly now, their lights flashing as they powered up. Something was happening. Something was being activated. Her stomach lurched, and for a moment she stood frozen, unsure whether to run or stay. The machine seemed to be alive, reacting to her presence. Whatever had been left dormant for so many years was waking up, and she had no idea what would happen next. The room was beginning to vibrate slightly under her feet, as though the walls themselves were coming alive. She had to act fast. With one final glance at the strange object on the floor, she snatched it up and ran toward the door. Buddy barked nervously behind her as she scrambled to climb back through the narrow opening she had come from. When she finally reached the pantry and pulled herself back into the main house, her heart was racing. She stood there panting, staring at the small, silent pantry that now felt more like a tomb. She had no idea what had just happened. But she knew one thing for sure. Whatever she had uncovered was far more than she had ever imagined. The house, once just a simple home, had turned into something much bigger, something much darker, and now it seemed it was calling her back. The hours after Martha's frantic escape from the underground room felt like a blur. She sat in the kitchen, her mind racing, trying to piece together the events of the day. Her heart was still pounding from the adrenaline of what she had discovered. What had she uncovered in that strange room? And what was the object she had found? Why did everything feel so alive? She couldn't stop thinking about the machines, the hum that seemed to have filled the entire underground space, and the way the walls had felt like they were vibrating. It was as though the house itself was connected to something far beyond what she could understand. Buddy, her dog, sat by her feet, looking up at her with his big, concerned eyes. He could sense that something wasn't right, but it wasn't just the dog that was uneasy. Martha was beginning to feel like she wasn't alone in her own home. The house, the very place she had planned to find peace and quiet, now felt like it was filled with something else, something hidden beneath its calm exterior. For hours, she sat in the kitchen, staring at the strange object in her hands, still wrapped in the same layer of dust it had carried from the underground room. It was small but felt oddly significant. Whatever this thing was, it didn't belong in a small home like hers. It didn't belong anywhere. Yet somehow it was connected to the house in ways she couldn't explain. The more she thought about it, the more questions began to swirl in her mind. What was its purpose? Who had built it? And why had it been hidden so carefully beneath her house for all these years? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Startled, she quickly set the object down on the table and made her way toward the door, her heart still racing. Who could be visiting this far out in the country? The houses here were spread out, far from any major roads. She hadn't expected anyone to stop by, especially this late in the evening. When she opened the door, she found an older man standing on her porch, dressed in worn jeans and a flannel shirt. His weathered face was serious, but there was a hint of kindness in his eyes. He looked familiar, though she couldn't place him immediately. "Good evening," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I've been meaning to speak with you about your property." Martha raised an eyebrow, confused. "My property?" "Yes," he said, glancing around as if making sure no one was nearby. "There's something you need to know. Something that I'm afraid you've stumbled upon." Her heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who this man was, but the way he spoke, the way he looked at her with a mix of concern and wariness, made her stomach twist with unease. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm someone who knows about the house. I used to live here many years ago. My family was involved in what's beneath the ground." "What you found?" He paused, his eyes flicking to the house behind her. "I should have warned you sooner, but I wasn't sure anyone would ever find it." Martha's mind raced. She felt a rush of adrenaline surge through her. There was more to this than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just some random man showing up. This was someone who knew about the secret she had uncovered. And he knew about the object. "I need to ask you to come inside," she said, stepping aside. "I've found something. Something I don't understand. You might be able to help me." The man hesitated, glancing nervously at the darkening sky before stepping inside. As soon as he crossed the threshold, he looked around the room with a quiet intensity, as though sensing the same unease that had been growing in Martha. He had clearly been here before. The place was still the same, a quiet, peaceful cottage tucked away in the woods. But it was different now, in a way that neither of them could ignore. Martha led him to the kitchen, where the strange object still sat on the table. The man's eyes immediately locked onto it. His expression darkened. "Where did you find this?" he asked in a hushed tone. "Down in the basement," Martha replied. "I was exploring and, well, I found a hidden room. The object was inside a metal box." He slowly sat down at the table, his hands resting on the edge. "I knew it was still down there. It's been there for decades, hidden away, but I didn't think anyone would ever find it." He paused, his eyes flicking to the object again, then back to her. "That's why I came. I'm afraid you've stumbled into something that's not just part of the house. It's part of something much bigger, much older." Martha felt a chill run down her spine. The air in the kitchen felt heavier now, and her mind was racing with more questions than ever before. "What do you mean? What's it part of? What is that thing?" The man sighed deeply, rubbing his hands together. "It's hard to explain. You see, this house, this land, was once part of something much larger. Many years ago, before your house was built, there was a project here. A secret one involving experiments with technology, energy, and something else. Something that shouldn't be tampered with." Martha's eyes widened. "Experiments?" What kind of experiments? He leaned in closer, lowering his voice even more. I don't know all the details. My family wasn't directly involved in the project, but we lived here at the time. We saw strange things, unexplainable things. There were rumors of people coming in and out of the property, people who weren't who they said they were, people who had other interests. He stopped for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. There was something hidden beneath the ground, something they didn't want anyone to find, a machine. That object you found is a part of it. Martha felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. A machine? Yes, he said. But not just any machine. This is something that has the potential to change things, something that shouldn't be used again. I don't know if it was ever fully activated, but if it is, if what you found is connected to it, then you're in grave danger. Martha stared at the man, her mind spinning. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The house, the land, and they were all connected to something far darker and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. What should I do? She asked, her voice shaking. He looked at her with a mixture of concern and regret. You have to get rid of it. Whatever you do, don't let it stay here. You have to destroy it before it's too late. Martha swallowed hard. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Destroy it? How could she destroy something that she didn't even understand? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had no choice. This wasn't just about a mysterious object. It was about a secret that had been buried for too long. A secret that could have dangerous consequences if left unchecked. She nodded slowly. I'll do whatever it takes. The man stood up, looking her in the eyes. Be careful. You don't know what you're dealing with. There are others who won't stop until they find it again. They'll do anything to get it back. With that, he turned and left the house, disappearing into the evening shadows. Martha stood there for a moment, stunned by the weight of what he had said. But she didn't have time to think. She had a decision to make, and she needed to act fast. She stared at the object once more, the hum still faintly echoing in her mind. Whatever it was, she couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. She had to destroy it, Mamrel, before it was too late. Martha stood in the quiet of her kitchen, her hands shaking as she stared at the strange object on the table. Her mind raced with the words of the old man who had visited her just an hour ago. The warning was clear. She had to get rid of the object, destroy it before anyone else found it. But how? What did she even know about this thing she had uncovered beneath her house? For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt truly alone. She had come to the house seeking peace, a fresh start after everything that had happened in her life. But now it felt like she was being dragged into something much bigger, something she wasn't prepared for. She wasn't sure who to trust or what to believe anymore. All she knew was that she couldn't let whatever was hidden in her house fall into the wrong hands. The object, still resting on the kitchen table, seemed to glow faintly under the light. Martha had moved it from the living room after the old man left, but she could still feel the weight of its presence, like it was watching her, waiting. She sat down at the table, the seat creaking softly under her weight. Her fingers hovered over the object, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she closed her eyes and thought back to everything she had learned over the past few days. The hidden room, the strange machines, the underground lab. None of it made sense. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became that this wasn't some forgotten piece of history. This was something active, something dangerous. She needed answers. Fast. Martha's mind drifted to the blueprint she had found in the basement. The old papers had been hidden inside one of the machines, but they had been far from ordinary. The blueprints weren't just sketches of a building or a structure. They looked like the plans for some kind of energy source, a massive, intricate design. Maybe this object was part of it, maybe it was a key. She didn't know, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to this than she understood. She stood up abruptly and paced across the room, her mind swirling with confusion. The object and the machines and the man's warning. Everything felt like it was connected, but to what? What had been going on here all those years ago? And why had it been hidden away? Who had been involved in all of this? Then without warning, she heard a faint sound. The hum. It was soft at first, like the sound of a distant engine, but it grew louder. Martha froze. Her heart began to pound in her chest. She turned toward the living room where the faint hum seemed to be coming from. Her instincts told her to run, but her curiosity, her need for answers, pulled her forward. She walked slowly, cautiously, into the living room. But the hum was not coming from any of the machines she had seen earlier. It was coming from the floor. The ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate lightly, as though something deep within the earth was waking up. The air in the room grew heavier, colder, and Martha's breath caught in her throat. Without thinking, she knelt down and pressed her ear to the floor. The hum grew louder, more intense. There was something down there beneath her feet, something that was stirring, something that had been dormant for far too long. She stood up quickly and ran to the pantry, opening the door that led to the basement. Her heart was in her throat as she grabbed the flashlight and descended the stairs. The darkness seemed to press in around her, thick and suffocating. But she pushed forward, each step taking her deeper into the unknown. When she reached the bottom, she stood there for a moment, trying to collect herself. The basement was still the same. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old boxes and crates. But she could still feel the hum vibrating through the floor. It was stronger now, like it was coming from the very walls. Martha looked around, scanning the room for any signs of what might be causing the noise. Then something caught her eye. There, in the far corner of the room, the old metal door that had led to the underground room was slightly ajar. The light on the machinery inside was flashing again. The hum was louder than ever. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to walk toward the door. The feeling in the pit of her stomach had grown colder. She stepped inside the underground room once more, her flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The machines were all still there, their lights flickering in and out of life, their low hum filling the room. But it wasn't just the machines that caught her attention now. It was the floor. The ground beneath her feet was moving, shifting ever so slightly as though something below the surface was stirring. Martha felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Whatever was happening, it was happening now. She had no idea what she was supposed to do. She had no training, no experience in dealing with things like this. She was just a woman in a quiet little house. But now she was standing in the middle of something much bigger. As she moved closer to the center of the room, she saw that the object, the one she had taken from the hidden box and was starting to glow. The lights around it flickered more intensely. The hum became a low, vibrating pulse, almost like the beat of a heart. Martha's eyes widened in disbelief. This wasn't just a machine. This was something alive. The floor beneath her began to shake, and suddenly, she heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps coming from behind her. A door slammed open, and Martha whipped around to see who had entered. It was the old man, the one who had warned her earlier. But something was different. His face was tense, his eyes wide with fear. His hands were shaking as he stepped into the room. "I told you to leave it alone," he shouted, his voice full of urgency. "You've awoken it." Before Martha could speak, he rushed past her and moved toward the glowing object on the floor. His eyes locked onto it, and for a moment he looked almost reverential, as if he recognized it in a way Martha couldn't. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the object, his fingers trembling as he touched it. The moment his hand made contact, the hum became deafening, and the lights in the room flashed wildly. "It's a power source," he finally said, his voice low. "A source of energy, a connection to something far beyond this world. It's not just a machine. It's a doorway." "A doorway to what?" Martha's voice was barely above a whisper, but the old man's expression was filled with fear. "It was never meant to be opened. It was sealed away for a reason," he said, his eyes darting around the room, panic creeping into his voice. "The people who built it, they wanted to harness something they didn't fully understand. But now it's awake, and it won't stop until it gets what it wants." The ground beneath them shook again, this time more violently. The lights flickered, and the machine seemed to pulse with energy, each beat vibrating through Martha's chest. She glanced at the man, her heart hammering. "What do we do?" "We destroy it," he said firmly. "We have to shut it down before it's too late." But before they could act, the humming stopped. Everything went silent. The room, once filled with noise, was now eerily quiet. Martha stood frozen, her body tense, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then it did. From the shadows, something began to take shape. Something that wasn't quite human. It was a figure, tall and dark, emerging from the corner of the room, its form shifting in the dim light. Martha's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a machine. It was something else entirely, and it was coming for them.